The sun had barely risen over the marble arches of the Forum when the first murmurs began, whispers of a night that would be recorded not for triumphs, but for the grotesque theater of justice. In the shadow of the Colosseum, where the scent of sand mingled with the distant roar of beasts, a ledger of punishments lay waiting, each entry more bizarre than the last. Damnatio ad bestias, the condemned thrust into the arena to face snarling lions and ferocious bears, turned the blood-soaked sand into a macabre spectacle for the masses. Pona Culle, reserved for those who dared to murder their own kin, saw parricides sewn into a sack with venomous snakes, a slab of water, and a slow, suffocating descent into oblivion. In the camps of the legions, fustuarium was the dreaded rite where a soldier's own comrades beat him to death for desertion or cowardice, the wooden clubs echoing the broken oath of loyalty. Beyond the arena, exile scattered the undesirables to distant islands and remote provinces, a fate of endless horizons and forgotten names. Whipping and branding scarred the backs of slaves and lower-class citizens, each lash a public reminder of their place. Wealth could be stripped in an instant, confiscation of property turning opulent villas into empty shells, the once rich reduced to pleading for crumbs. Public humiliation took many forms: chains that clanged with each step of a forced march, wooden stocks that held offenders in uncomfortable stillness for the amusement of passers-by. For rebels and the most serious crimes, crucifixion offered a slow, agonizing death, the silhouette of a cross against the sky, a warning to all who might defy the state. Stockade punishments locked offenders in cramped wooden cages, the creak of hinges a metronome of shame. And though rare, execution by burning turned the night into a blaze of terror, the flames licking the sky as a final, terrifying statement. Amid this catalogue of cruelty stood a young centurion named Lucius, his armor still bearing the dents of recent battle. He had watched the crowd's cheers turn to gasps as a thief was dragged into the arena, his fate sealed by the roar of a waiting tiger. Lucius felt the weight of the law settle upon his shoulders, a reminder that even those who wielded power could become the next entry in the ledger, if a single misstep sent him from the ranks of the honored to the list of the condemned. The question lingered like a thin mist over the Forum, and as the sun climbed higher, the heat pressed down on the stone, making the air tremble. Lucius found himself drawn, almost involuntarily, toward the western colonnade where a narrow doorway led to the substructures of the arena, tunnels used by slaves and beasts alike. He slipped through the shadowed arch, his sandals silent on the worn flagstones, and descended into the dimly lit underbelly where the scent of sweat and animal musk clung to the walls. There, half hidden behind a stack of crates, a figure emerged from the gloom. She was cloaked in a simple woolen mantle, her hair bound in a tight braid that fell to her shoulders. Her eyes, dark and steady, met Lucius's without surprise. "Centurion," she whispered, the name slipping out like a secret oath. "You have been watching the ledger, but you have not yet seen the ink that writes it." Lucius's hand tightened around the hilt of his sword, though he kept it sheathed. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice low enough to be swallowed by the echoing drips of water from the stone ceiling. "Call me Alia," she replied, stepping forward. "I am the daughter of a senator who fell to the very punishments you have just catalogued. My family was stripped, my brother crucified for a crime he did not commit. I have lived in the shadows of this city, learning its hidden veins, and I have gathered those who cannot bear the weight of the law any longer." Alia gestured to a narrow passage that led deeper into the labyrinth. "There is a council of men and women, former soldiers, freed slaves, even a few disgraced magistrates, who meet in the old baths beneath the Palatine. We plan to expose the ledger, to turn the very instruments of terror against those who wield them. But we need someone who commands respect among the legions, someone who can move between the public eye and the hidden world without raising suspicion." Lucius felt the familiar pull of duty clash with the ember of rebellion that had been kindling within him. He thought of the tiger's snarls, the screams of the condemned, the weight of his own armor that seemed to grow heavier with each breath. "If I join you," he said, "what will become of me? The law does not look kindly on those who conspire." Alia's lips curled into a faint smile. "The law looks kindly on those who die quietly. It does not punish the dead. We will give you a chance to disappear, faked death, a burial in a common grave, and a new name. In return, you will help us secure the records stored in the Praetorian archives, the very ledgers that list every punishment, every name, every secret transaction." A distant clang reverberated through the tunnels, the sound of a guard's boot striking metal. Lucius's eyes darted to the narrow slit where a torch flickered, casting wavering shadows. He knew the time for decision was fleeting. He lowered his gaze to the cold stone beneath his feet, feeling the pulse of the city through the ground, a rhythm of oppression and whispered hope. "Very well," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "I will aid you. But know this, I will not betray my oath to Rome unless I am certain that the oath itself is a lie." Alia nodded, her hand resting briefly on his forearm. "Then we begin tonight, when the arena empties and the crowds disperse. Meet me at the third column of the southern wall, where the moonlight catches the marble. Bring only what you can carry, your sword, a cloak, and the resolve to walk into darkness." She turned and melted back into the shadows, leaving Lucius alone with the echo of her promise and the weight of his choice. He rose, the stone floor cool beneath his boots, and made his way back toward the sunlight, each step a silent pact with a future that might rewrite the very ledger that had haunted his thoughts. The city bustled above, unaware that beneath its marble facades, a new chapter was being forged, one that would test the limits of loyalty, justice, and the courage to defy a system built on blood. The night deepened, and the moon slipped behind a thin veil of cloud, turning the marble column into a dark silhouette. Lucius slipped his hand into the pocket of his cloak, feeling the cool metal of the lockpicks against his palm. Alia whispered the password, Vox Tenebris, into his ear, and he repeated it at the iron gate that guarded the lower level of the Praetorian barracks. The guards, weary from the day's patrols, barely glanced at the two figures cloaked in darkness before the latch clicked open. Inside, the corridors were lined with rows of sleeping soldiers, their helmets stacked like helmets of ancient statues. The air was thick with the scent of oil and damp stone. Lucius moved with the practiced silence of a veteran legionary, his boots barely making a sound on the packed earth. Aelia led him through a series of narrow stairwells that spiraled down into the catacombs beneath the Palatine, where the old baths lay in ruin, their vaulted ceilings now home to dripping water and the echo of distant water pipes. At the heart of the baths, a vaulted chamber opened onto a stone table piled with scrolls, wax tablets, and a single massive iron chest bound with iron bands. Around the table sat the council, a scarred former centurion named Gaius, a freed slave woman named Marcia whose eyes glittered with fierce intelligence, and a disgraced magistrate, Publius, whose once proud toga now hung in tatters. Their faces were lit by the flickering light of oil lamps, casting long shadows that danced across the walls. "We have little time," Gaius said, his voice a low rasp. "The Praetorian prefect will have his men sweep these tunnels at first light. The ledger is locked in that chest, sealed with a seal of the emperor himself. Only the master key can open it, and it rests on the arm of the centurion who guards the inner vault." Marcia slid a thin parchment across the table. "This is a map of the inner vault's patrol routes. The centurion changes his shift at the third watch, exactly when the moon is highest. We will need a diversion." Lucius felt the weight of his sword at his side, the metal a reminder of his oath. He glanced at Aelia, whose eyes met his with a steady resolve. "What is the diversion?" he asked. Aelia produced a small satchel of powdered nightshade and a handful of small, polished stones. "We will release the night crawlers, those rats that infest the sewers, into the guards' quarters. Their screams will draw the centurion and his men away for a few precious minutes. In that window, I will slip the key from his belt." Publius nodded, his gaunt hand trembling as he lifted a bronze dagger. "And once the ledger is in our hands, we must decide what to do with it. Its pages hold the names of every condemned, every bribe, every secret pact. If we expose it, the empire will tremble. If we hide it, the oppression continues." Lucius tightened his grip on his sword. "Then we expose it. The dead deserve justice." The plan set, the conspirators dispersed into the shadows, each assuming a role. Lucius and Aelia slipped toward the guards' quarters, the night crawlers already gathered in the dank tunnels below. With a whispered command, Aelia scattered the powdered nightshade into the air, and the rats surged forward, their tiny bodies a living cloud that scuttled up the stone walls and into the open doors of the centurion's post. A guttural shout rose from the guard's chamber, followed by the clatter of armor and the frantic clanging of swords. The centurion, a hulking man named Decimus, emerged, his face twisted in fury as he tried to swat the vermin away. In the chaos, Aelia slipped forward, her cloak fluttering like a dark wave. She reached the centurion's belt, her fingers deft as a thief's, and lifted the iron key that dangled from a loop. At the same moment, Lucius slipped into the inner vault, his heart pounding against his ribs. The iron chest loomed before him, its surface cold and unyielding. He inserted the key, feeling the tumblers click in a rhythm that echoed the beating of his own heart. With a final turn, the lock surrendered and the heavy lid creaked open. Inside lay rows upon rows of parchment, each bearing the names of citizens condemned for crimes both real and imagined. There were lists of tax collectors who siphoned grain, magistrates who sold justice to the highest bidder, and most painfully for Lucius, a thin scroll bearing his own name, marked not for crime, but for the betrayal of a brother who had died for a cause he had not yet understood. Aelia's voice cut through the silence. "Take what you can. We have minutes before the guards regroup." Lucius gathered the most incriminating scrolls, his fingers trembling as he lifted the one that named his brother, the one that detailed the false charges that had led to his crucifixion. He felt a surge of grief and rage, but also a strange, cold clarity. The ledger was not just a record, it was a weapon. As they retreated, the sound of boots grew louder. The centurion, having finally driven the rats away, shouted orders to his men. The council members converged at the exit, their faces set in grim determination. Marcia clutched a bundle of scrolls to her chest, her eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of pursuit. The moon, now a thin sliver, barely illuminated the stone arches as they slipped back into the labyrinthine tunnels. Lucius could hear the distant clang of swords and the shouts of Praetorian soldiers, but the passage they had taken was narrow enough to keep them hidden. He glanced at Aelia, who gave him a brief, approving nod. "We have what we need," she whispered. "Now we must decide how to unleash it." Lucius felt the weight of the scrolls in his arms, the weight of his brother's name, and the weight of a city that had forgotten the meaning of justice. The night stretched ahead, full of danger and possibility, and the path forward was as uncertain as the flickering torchlight that guided them deeper into Rome's hidden heart. Aelia slipped a thin blade from her boot and, with a practiced twist, pried the rusted latch of the grill just enough to create a gap. The stone gave way with a sigh, revealing a narrow shaft that descended into the foul darkness of Rome's underbelly. A cold draft rose from the depths, carrying with it the distant murmur of water and the faint echo of voices that seemed to belong to a world far removed from the marble streets above. Lucius hesitated only a heartbeat before stepping through the opening, the bundle of scrolls pressed against his chest. The stone walls narrowed, forcing the group into a single file. Marcia moved ahead, her lantern casting a wavering amber glow that illuminated the slick, moss-covered stones. The air grew thicker, the scent of rot and river mud mingling with the metallic tang of blood that still clung to the stone from past skirmishes. At the bottom of the shaft, the tunnel opened into a vaulted chamber carved from the riverbed itself. Water lapped at the edges, and a faint current whispered through the cavern, carrying with it the soft cadence of a distant chant. In the center of the space stood a low stone altar, upon which a bundle of freshly woven reeds lay, their tips still wet from the river. Around the altar, a circle of cloaked figures knelt, their faces hidden beneath hoods, their hands raised in silent prayer. Alia's eyes narrowed as she recognized the insignia stitched into the hem of one of the cloaks, a silver laurel leaf, the secret mark of the Vox Populi asterisk, the underground network of citizens who had long whispered of rebellion. She stepped forward, her voice low but steady. "We have what the Senate hides. The names of the corrupt, the false charges, the truth of my brother's death. The city must see it." The leader of the circle, a woman whose eyes glimmered like polished obsidian, lifted her head. "I am Livia," she said, her voice resonant despite the hood. "You have brought the fire we have waited for. But the ledger alone will not topple the empire. It must be read aloud, spread through the streets, and turned into a spark that ignites the people's anger." Lucius felt the scroll of his brother's name tremble in his grip. "Will you help us?" he asked, his throat raw. "Will you carry these names to the market, to the forums, to the ears of those who still believe in justice?" Livia nodded, and with a swift motion she produced a small, polished bronze cylinder from within her cloak. "This is a Cithara asterisk of the Old Republic, a device that can amplify a voice to the farthest corners of the city. We will use it to broadcast the truth from the steps of the Forum. But first, we must move the scrolls to safety. The Praetorians will be searching the sewers. They know we are here." Aelia slipped a hand into her own satchel and withdrew a handful of small, sealed vials. "These are the nightshade dust we used earlier," she whispered. "A single pinch will silence any guard who dares to follow. We will scatter them along the tunnels, creating a veil of unconsciousness that will buy us time." Marcia tightened her grip on the bundle, her jaw set. "Then we go now. The river will carry us to the forum's edge. From there, we can slip into the crowd and we will let the asterisk Cithara asterisk do the rest," Livia finished, a thin smile breaking through the shadows. "The people will hear the names of those who have bled Rome's soul. They will rise, and the empire will feel the weight of its own sins." The group moved as one, slipping through the water-slick corridors, sprinkling the nightshade dust into the cracks and crevices. The faint sound of distant footsteps grew louder, the Praetorians' torches flickering against the stone. A sudden splash echoed as a guard slipped on the damp floor, collapsing into unconsciousness before he could raise his sword. Reaching the riverbank, the current tugged at their boots, pulling them toward the bustling heart of the city. The moon, now a thin crescent, reflected off the water's surface, casting silver ribbons that seemed to guide their path. As they emerged onto the banks near the Forum, the roar of the market rose around them, vendors shouting, citizens bargaining, the clatter of carts on cobblestones. Lucius glanced at the scroll in his hands, the ink still fresh, the accusation of betrayal stark against the parchment. He felt the weight of his brother's memory settle into a resolve that steadied his trembling fingers. With a final breath, he stepped onto the marble steps, the asterisk Cithara asterisk cradled in Livia's arms, and prepared to let the hidden truths of Rome echo through its very soul. The bronze Cithara asterisk sang before it was even struck, a low hum that seemed to draw the very air toward the marble steps. Livia lifted the instrument, her fingers finding the ancient strings with practiced ease. The crowd, already thick with the scent of spices and the clamor of barter, fell into a sudden, uneasy hush as the first note resonated, rolling over the forum like a tide. Lucius felt the weight of the scroll settle against his chest, each name a pulse of fire in his veins. He raised his voice, the words trembling at first, then gaining strength as the asterisk Cithara amplified them beyond the reach of any single ear. Citizens of Rome, hear the names of those who have been silenced by the empire's greed. He spoke of Marcus, the baker's son who dared to question the grain tax, of Julia, the midwife who tended the poor while the Senate hoarded gold, of Gaius, the senator whose counsel was cut short for daring to speak truth to power. With each syllable, the asterisk Cithara carried his grief and fury to the farthest corners of the market, to the rooftops where children played, to the shadows where the old men whispered of forgotten republic ideals. A murmur rose, first tentative, then swelling into a roar. Hands that had been empty now clutched makeshift weapons, sticks, broken pottery, even the iron hooks of market stalls. Faces that had been turned away by fear now burned with a fierce, collective resolve. The Praetorians, their armor glinting in the lantern light, surged forward, shields raised, trying to push through the throng. Their commander barked orders, but the crowd formed a living wall, a sea of bodies that would not be broken. Livia's eyes never left Lucius. She pressed a palm against the asterisk Cithara asterisk S resonating chamber, sending a ripple of sound that seemed to vibrate the stones themselves. "We are not alone," she shouted, her voice amplified to a thunderclap. "The Republic lives in each of you. Let its memory rise like a phoenix from the ashes of oppression." From the edge of the forum, a figure in a dark cloak slipped forward. Aelia, her satchel now empty, the nightshade dust already spent. She produced a small, polished mirror, angled it toward the sun's waning light, and reflected a flash that caught the eyes of the Praetorians. For a heartbeat, the soldiers hesitated, blinded and disoriented, giving the rebels the opening they needed. Marcia, clutching the bundle of scrolls, hurled them into the crowd. The parchment fluttered like white birds, each landing in the hands of a different citizen. A baker read his brother's name aloud. A fishmonger shouted the accusation of a corrupt tax collector. A child, eyes wide with wonder, repeated the names in a trembling voice that echoed through the arches. The Praetorians regrouped, swords drawn, but the momentum of the people was now a force of its own. A wave of shouts, chants, and the relentless strum of the cithara surged forward. The sound cracked the veneer of order the empire had built for centuries. In the midst of the chaos, Lucius felt a hand grip his shoulder, Livia's grip firm and unyielding. "This is only the beginning," she whispered, her breath hot against his ear. "The empire will hear us, and it will tremble." A sudden crash reverberated as a column of marble, dislodged by the throng, tumbled toward the center of the forum. The Praetorians scrambled to block it, but the crowd, driven by a newfound purpose, pushed the stone aside, turning it into a barricade against the soldiers. The clash of steel rang out, mingling with the cithara s song, creating a discordant symphony of rebellion. As the night deepened, lanterns flickered and the moon slipped behind a veil of clouds, but the voices of the people did not fade. They rose, one after another, each name a spark, each breath a promise that the truth could not be buried. The cithara sang on, its ancient strings vibrating with the heartbeat of a city on the brink of transformation, and Lucius, clutching the scroll of his brother's name, felt the first true taste of hope. The surge carried Lucius toward the marble altar that once held the statue of the forgotten goddess of liberty. The stone steps, slick with rain, became a ramp for the tide of bodies, and beneath his feet the ancient marble cracked, sending shards glittering like broken promises. A sudden roar rose from the front of the crowd as a group of women, their hair bound with red ribbons, lifted a massive bronze shield, once a ceremonial offering to the empire, and hurled it into the ranks of the Praetorians. The shield slammed against a soldier's helm, splintering the metal and sending a spray of blood across the stone. Livia, still cradling the cithara felt the instrument vibrate with a new urgency. She struck a rapid, staccato rhythm that mimicked the pounding of hearts, and the melody rose above the clamor, a beacon that guided the rebels through the chaos. Beside her, Aelia slipped a thin blade from her boot, and with a swift motion, sliced the strap of a Praetorian's belt, freeing a captive citizen who had been bound to a cart. The freed man, eyes wild with terror and hope, lunged forward, joining the fray with a guttural cry that seemed to echo the ancient oaths of the Republic. The Praetorian commander, a grizzled veteran named Gaius Varro, barked a new order. "Form a phalanx. Hold the western arch." He thrust his sword toward the archway, and a line of soldiers surged to block the rebels. Yet the crowd, now a living wall of determination, pressed against the arch, their shoulders grinding against the iron bars. The pressure caused the arch to buckle, and a cascade of dust fell like a veil over the battlefield. In that moment of obscurity, Marcia reappeared, clutching a fresh bundle of scrolls, this time sealed with wax bearing the emblem of the Senate. She thrust them into the hands of the nearest citizens, urging them to read aloud the names of those who had suffered under the tax collector's greed. A child's voice, trembling but clear, rose above the din. Marcus Flavius condemned for speaking truth. The name reverberated through the arches, and a ripple of recognition spread. Men who had once kept their heads down now lifted their eyes, recalling the quiet farmer who had been taken to the dungeons for refusing to pay the illegal levy. The memory ignited a fire that turned fear into fury. Lanterns, knocked from their posts, rolled across the stone, casting erratic shadows that danced like specters of the old republic. From the high balcony of the Senate House, a figure in a pristine white toga watched the unfolding revolt. Senator Quintus Severus, a man whose family had long been loyal to the imperial throne, felt the weight of centuries of compromise settle upon his shoulders. He raised his hand, and a messenger descended, bearing a sealed scroll stamped with the imperial seal. The message was brief: all forces to converge on the Forum. The Emperor will arrive at sunrise. Surrender now, and mercy will be granted. Lucius caught the messenger's eye and, without hesitation, tore the seal from the parchment. He read the words aloud, his voice carrying over the clamor. The Emperor will come. Mercy for those who lay down arms. The crowd fell into a stunned hush, the rhythm of the asterisk cithara asterisk faltering as uncertainty seeped in. Livia's fingers hovered over the strings, her gaze flickering between the hopeful faces around her and the looming threat of imperial retribution. Aelia stepped forward, her cloak billowing, and spoke with a calm that cut through the tension. Mercy from a tyrant is a blade wrapped in silk. We have already tasted the taste of freedom. If we surrender now, we surrender the spark that could ignite the whole world. Her words struck a chord, and the crowd responded with a unified chant, louder than any Praetorian drum. Libertas! Libertas! The Praetorians, sensing the shift, tightened their grip on their swords. Gaius Varro, his eyes narrowed, shouted, "Hold! Do not let them break our line." He lunged toward the center of the Forum, his blade flashing. In the split second before impact, Livia struck a resonant chord that reverberated through the stone, causing a tremor that sent the Praetorians' footing to falter. The sword clanged against the marble, and Varro stumbled, his armor rattling like a dying beast. Lucius seized the moment. He thrust the scroll of his brother's name into the chest of a nearby soldier, the parchment catching the light and momentarily blinding the man. The soldier staggered, dropping his shield, and the crowd surged forward, pressing the Praetorians back toward the outer colonnades. The cithara asterisk S melody swelled once more, a triumphant hymn that seemed to summon the very spirit of the Republic from the ruins of its monuments. As the first pale rays of dawn pierced the clouds, the silhouette of a carriage appeared on the distant road, its wheels turning slowly toward the Forum. The imperial standard, a golden eagle, fluttered above it, casting a cold gleam over the battlefield. The sound of marching boots grew louder, a tide of disciplined soldiers ready to crush the uprising. Aelia caught Lucius's eye again, a silent question passing between them. He nodded, and together they turned to the crowd, raising their voices above the approaching thunder of imperial forces. "We stand at the edge of a new age," Livia shouted, her voice now a clarion call. "If the Empire wishes to crush us, Let it know that the heart of Rome beats in every citizen here. We will not be silenced. The crowd answered with a roar that shook the marble columns, and the asterisk cithara asterisk rang out its final, defiant chord as the imperial cavalry thundered into the forum, the clash of steel and song beginning a battle that would decide the fate of a city yearning to remember its own name. The young woman's blade sang a thin, bright note as it cleaved through the Praetorian line, and the shock of her ferocity rippled through the crowd like a sudden gust. She was not a stranger. The scar that ran from her left cheek to the edge of her jaw marked her as the daughter of the senator, whose house had been razed in the first purge. Her name, Valeria, was whispered by those who had seen her before, a phantom of resistance who had vanished into the catacombs beneath the Forum months earlier. Now she stood, shield raised, eyes blazing, a living emblem of the Republic's stubborn heart. Aelia seized the moment, thrusting her own sword toward the nearest Praetorian, and driving it back with a force that sent the soldier stumbling into the marble steps. Lucius, his breath ragged from the earlier clash, ducked beneath a swinging blade and lunged at a legionary whose armor bore the imperial insignia. Their swords met in a flash of steel, and for a heartbeat the world narrowed to the clash of metal and the thrum of Livia's asterisk cithara asterisk, still resonating in the stone as if the instrument itself refused to be silenced. From the far end of the forum, the imperial cavalry surged forward, their horses snorting clouds of dust that mingled with the early morning mist. The golden eagle on the standard caught the first light, flaring like a sunburst that seemed to mock the rebels' defiance. Yet as the cavalry closed, a sudden, low rumble rolled across the marble terraces. The ground beneath the imperial ranks shivered, and a fissure opened near the central column, swallowing the hooves of two charging horses and sending their riders sprawling into the dust. The fissure was no accident. Beneath the forum, the old sewers and forgotten tunnels, once used by conspirators and slaves alike, had been reinforced by a secret cadre of engineers loyal to the cause. Valeria had known the hidden passages, and with a swift motion she signaled to a group of youths who had slipped in earlier. They emerged from the shadows, torches alight, and hurled barrels of oil into the breach. The oil ignited, a wall of flame licking the marble and forcing the imperial cavalry to halt, their disciplined advance broken by the sudden blaze. In the chaos, Gaius Varro found himself isolated, his armor scorched, his sword slick with blood. He stared at the flames, the heat searing his face, and for the first time in his career felt the tremor of doubt. Aelia, seeing his hesitation, stepped forward, her voice cutting through the roar of battle. Varro, you have served Rome for decades. Yet Rome is not the empire that crushes its own people. Lay down your sword, and we can rebuild together. Varro's eyes flickered between the inferno and the determined faces of the rebels. The weight of his years, the countless campaigns, the loyalty to an emperor he had never met, pressed upon him. With a guttural sigh, he lowered his weapon, the clatter of steel against stone echoing like a mournful bell. The Praetorians around him faltered, uncertain, as their commander stepped back from the fight. At that instant, the distant road that had carried the imperial carriage began to stir. The wheels creaked, and a figure emerged from the carriage, his cloak billowing, his face half hidden beneath a laurel wreath. The emperor himself, Marcus Aurelius Severus, had arrived not on a throne of pomp but on a modest chariot, his eyes scanning the tumult with a measured calm. He dismounted, his sandals striking the marble with a deliberate tread, and raised his hand, demanding silence. A hush fell over the forum, broken only by the crackle of fire and the distant clamor of the crowd. The emperor's voice, resonant and authoritative, carried across the stone. "Citizens of Rome, I have come to hear your grievances, not to impose my will with the sword. Let us speak, lest this city be reduced to ash." Livia lowered her cithara slowly, the strings still humming with the echo of the earlier chord. She stepped forward, her posture regal despite the soot staining her tunic. "Your Majesty," she said, "the Republic lives in the hearts of its people. We do not seek war, but we will not surrender the flame that gives us life." Valeria, still gripping her short sword, nodded. "If you truly wish peace, lay down your standards and listen. The people will not be silenced by fear." The emperor regarded them, his gaze lingering on the scarred face of Valeria, the steadfast eyes of Aelia, the weary resolve of Lucius, and the fierce determination of Livia. He turned to his retinue, then back to the assembled masses. "Very well," he declared. "We shall convene a council within these walls. No blood shall be shed this day. Let the voices of Rome be heard, and let us decide together the future of this great city." A tentative murmur rose from the crowd, a mixture of hope and caution. The flames still licked the marble, but the heat seemed to soften, as if the very stone sensed the possibility of reconciliation. The rebels lowered their weapons, the Praetorians hesitated, and the cithara rested in Livia's hands, its strings vibrating with a promise that, even in the darkest hour, music and liberty could still find a way to be heard. The woman's eyes never left Varro's, and in the flicker of torchlight she seemed to carry a weight older than the forum itself. She lifted the wooden box, its lid etched with the sigil of a forgotten legion, two wolves intertwined around a broken fasces. With deliberate care she opened it, revealing a single, weather-worn scroll bound in leather. The parchment, though browned by age, bore a seal that matched the emblem on the box, the mark of the cohors silvarum, the elite forest troops who had vanished during the wars in Germania 3 decades prior. Varro stepped forward, his breath shallow, the heat of the flames now a distant echo in his ears. "What is this?" he asked, his voice hoarse from the smoke and the sudden surge of curiosity. The young woman, her name, the emperor later learned, was Marcia, unrolled the scroll with trembling hands. The ink, though faded, was still legible. It was a declaration, penned by a commander named Gaius Flavius Severus, a distant cousin of the emperor, who had led the cohors silvarum into the northern woods and never returned. The text spoke of a hidden cache of supplies, a secret oath to protect Rome from a darkness that would rise when the empire's heart grew too proud, and a warning that the legion's spirit would awaken only when a true son of Rome laid down his sword in humility. A murmur rippled through the assembled crowd. Livia tightened her grip on the asterisk Cythara asterisk, her fingers instinctively finding the strings as if ready to summon a song of warning. Valeria's sword clinked softly against her belt, the metal a reminder of the ever-present danger. Aelia leaned in, eyes scanning the scroll, her mind racing to connect the ancient prophecy with the present turmoil. The prophecy speaks of a darkness, the emperor said, his voice low but carrying authority. What darkness could it be? And why now, after all these years? He turned his gaze to Marcia. You have brought this to us, child. Speak plainly. Marcia swallowed, the weight of centuries evident in her posture. The darkness is not a foe of steel, but of silence. When the people are forced to whisper their grievances, the spirit of the cohors silvarum awakens to protect the voice of Rome. The cache contains not weapons but instruments, lutes, drums, scrolls of law, meant to give the people a means to speak, to sing, to record. If those are destroyed, the silence will become a weapon. Varro felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He remembered the night he had first taken the oath to protect the empire, the oath that had bound him to the very people he now stood before. The scroll's words resonated with a truth he had long suppressed, that an empire could not survive on force alone. Then we must find this cache, the emperor declared, his eyes alight with a resolve that cut through the smoke. And we must ensure that every citizen of Rome can raise his voice, whether through song, word, or law. Aelia stepped forward, her hand resting lightly on Varro's arm. We will form a council not only of soldiers and senators, but of artisans, musicians, and the common folk. We will protect the cache and distribute its contents, so that the spirit of the cohors silvarum lives in every street. Livia raised her cithara once more, letting a single, clear note ring out across the forum. The sound seemed to lift the ash from the air, as if the very stone inhaled the melody and exhaled hope. Valeria placed her sword on the ground, the blade catching the firelight, and knelt, a silent pledge to guard the newfound peace. Marcia, still clutching the wooden box, felt a surge of relief. She had traveled from the remote village of Alba Longa, guided by an old seer who had whispered of a day when the asterisk cohors silvarum would be called upon again. The journey had been perilous. Bandits, harsh winter, and the ever-watchful eyes of the imperial bureaucracy. But the sight of the emperor, the rebels, and the Praetorians united in purpose made every hardship worth it. The council convened within the shadowed colonnades of the Temple of Jupiter, its marble walls echoing with the soft hum of Livia's asterisk cithara and the rustle of parchment. Scholars debated the legal implications of the scroll. Musicians cataloged the instruments described. Soldiers mapped the likely location of the hidden cache, a forgotten grove beyond the Aventine Hill where the cohors silvarum had once trained. As night fell, the flames that had threatened to consume the forum were finally doused, the last embers smoldering beneath a blanket of soot. The city, bruised but breathing, seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next step. Varro, now standing beside the emperor, felt the old armor of his rank loosen, replaced by a mantle of purpose he had never imagined. He turned to Marcia, nodding in gratitude. "Your courage has given us a path," he said. "We will walk it together." Outside, the distant road that had brought the imperial carriage began to quiet, the wheels turning back toward the heart of Rome. The chariot, now empty, waited for its master, while the people of the Forum, soldiers, rebels, musicians, and citizens, stood side by side, ready to listen, to speak, and to rebuild a Rome whose greatest strength would be its voice. The sun rose over the Aventine, spilling amber across the terracotta roofs and turning the Tiber into a ribbon of molten gold. Varro and Marcia slipped through the narrow alleys that wound between the market stalls, their footsteps muffled by the early bustle of vendors arranging figs, olives, and fresh bread. The wooden box thumped lightly against Marcia's side, its lid sealed with a wax imprint of a leaf, an emblem the seer had said marked the path to the cohors silvarum. Aelia rode ahead on a modest horse, her cloak fluttering like a banner of resolve. She paused at the edge of the hill, where the city's stone gave way to a thicket of ancient oaks and olive trees. The air here was cooler, scented with pine and the faint, lingering perfume of incense that seemed to rise from the very ground. She turned, her eyes meeting Varro's, and nodded. "The grove is close. The old maps speak of a stone circle that guards the entrance. Keep your ears open, the forest remembers." They entered the grove, the canopy above forming a vaulted ceiling of interlaced branches. Sunlight filtered through in shafts, illuminating patches of moss that glowed like emeralds. In the center of the clearing lay a circle of weathered basalt stones, each etched with symbols of lyres, scrolls, and swords, an ancient sigil of the cohors silvarum, the very union of voice and steel the empire had once revered. Marcia stepped forward, her hand trembling as she traced the central stone's carving. The wax seal on her box softened under the morning warmth, and a faint hum rose from within, as if the contents themselves were eager to be heard. She pressed the box against the stone, and the ground shivered ever so slightly. The basalt stones shifted, grinding against each other, and a hidden doorway yawned open beneath the earth, revealing a stairwell spiraled with vines that seemed to pulse with a quiet rhythm. Varro drew his sword, not for battle but to clear the overgrowth. With each swipe, the vines recoiled, parting like curtains to reveal a vaulted chamber carved from the living rock. The walls were lined with niches, each holding a different artifact: bronze trumpets, silver lyres, parchment scrolls bound in leather, and a set of bronze tablets inscribed with verses in a language that sang rather than spoke. At the heart of the chamber lay a pedestal upon which rested a single, unblemished scroll, its parchment shimmering with an inner light. Livia, who had followed them on foot, approached reverently, her cithara cradled against her chest. She lifted the instrument and with a breath, let a soft chord resonate through the stone. The vibration traveled through the chamber, causing the scroll to unfurl on its own, its ink flowing like liquid gold. The words that appeared were not merely instructions, but a manifesto, a covenant that bound the empire's power to the collective voice of its people. It spoke of festivals where soldiers and artisans would perform together, of courts where poets could argue cases, and of a library where every citizen could record their songs and stories for posterity. The final line glowed brightest. When the voice of the many rises, the empire shall stand unshaken. A chorus of awe rose from the council members who had followed the trail. Aelia, Valeria, the scholars, and even a few praetorians who had set aside their spears for this moment. Valeria knelt before the pedestal, her hand resting on the sword she had once laid down, and whispered a promise to protect this knowledge as fiercely as she had defended the city's walls. Marcia opened the wooden box, revealing a collection of ancient instruments, flutes of bone, drums of goat skin, and a small, intricately carved wooden harp. Each bore the same leaf seal, a token of the seer's guidance. Livia lifted the harp, its strings humming in anticipation, and began to play a melody that seemed to echo the very heartbeat of Rome. The music swelled, filling the hidden chamber and spilling out through the stone doorway, traveling up the spiral stairs and out into the grove. As the notes rose, the trees swayed, and a gentle wind carried the sound across the Aventine, over the rooftops, and into the streets below. Citizens paused in their chores, heads turning toward the distant hymn. Soldiers lowered their shields, merchants set aside their wares, and children stopped their games to listen. From the forum, the emperor felt the resonance in his chest. He raised his hand, not in command but in invitation. "Let this be the first of many," he declared, his voice steady and warm. "From this day forward, Rome shall be a chorus, each voice a thread in the tapestry of our destiny." The council dispersed from the grove, each member bearing a piece of the cash, a scroll, an instrument, a tablet of law. They returned to the city bearing not only relics but a renewed purpose. In the weeks that followed, the streets of Rome filled with spontaneous choirs, debates held in the market squares, and festivals where the clang of swords blended with the lilting of lyres. The cohors silvarum lived again, not as a hidden order, but as the living pulse of a people who had learned that true strength rose from the harmony of many voices. The following spring, a delegation from the distant province of Hispania arrived bearing gifts of amber and obsidian, but also a petition that trembled with urgency. Their governor, a stoic man named Lucio, spoke of a famine that had crippled the wheat fields along the Ebro, and of restless peasants whose cries threatened to erupt into rebellion. He had heard of Rome's new covenant, of the power that rose when voices united, and begged the emperor to send aid, not merely grain, but the very song that had healed the capital. The emperor convened a council in the atrium of the Senate House, where marble columns caught the morning light, and the air hummed with anticipation. Livia entered with her cithara slung across her back, her eyes bright with purpose. Beside her, Alia carried a scroll of verses she had composed for the occasion, each line a promise of solidarity. Valeria, now commander of the newly formed cohort of harmonists, stood with a small cohort of soldiers whose shields bore the leaf seal, ready to protect the convoy that would travel north. Marcia, ever the chronicler, unfurled a vellum map, tracing the route that would lead them through the rolling hills of the Sabine countryside and across the Tiber's broad span. The empire's strength is no longer measured by the weight of its legions alone, the emperor said, his voice resonant in the vaulted hall. It is measured by the willingness of its people to lift each other up. He turned to Livia. Take your music to the fields of Hispania. Let the wind carry our hope. Livia bowed, feeling the weight of centuries in the strings of her instrument. She gathered a troupe of singers, flautists, and drummers from the market squares, men and women whose faces bore the marks of labor, yet whose hearts beat in rhythm with the city's newfound pulse. They set out at dawn, their caravan winding through the countryside like a living procession, the sound of drums echoing off the stone walls of villas, and the soft murmur of flutes mingling with the rustle of wheat. When they reached the parched fields, the sight was stark. Golden stalks drooped like tired soldiers, and the sky hung heavy with a haze of dust. The peasants gathered around the convoy, eyes wary but hopeful. Livia lifted her cithara, and the first chord rose, low and steady, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. The drummers began a steady rhythm, a pulse that seemed to coax the soil to listen. The singers raised their voices in a hymn that spoke of rain, of renewal, and of the bond that tied every Roman, whether senator or serf, to the same sky. As the melody swelled, a gentle breeze stirred, carrying the notes across the fields. The wind caught the dry stalks, and a faint rustle rose, as if the wheat itself were answering the call. Within hours, dark clouds gathered on the horizon, heavy with promise. A sudden, warm rain fell, soaking the cracked earth, turning dust to mud, and coaxing the wilted grain to stand upright once more. The peasants erupted in joyous shouts, their cries mingling with the lingering song, and the convoy's musicians felt the ancient covenant pulse through them, a living proof that the voice of many could indeed move the heavens. Word of the miracle traveled faster than the rain itself. In Rome, the streets buzzed with fresh verses celebrating the triumph, and the cohors silvarum found new recruits eager to learn the art of weaving music with purpose. Yet not all welcomed this shift. In the Senate's shadowed alcoves, a faction of traditionalists, led by the austere senator Gaius Severus, whispered doubts. "We have built an empire on steel and law," Severus warned, his eyes narrowed. "To place our fate in song is folly. What if the music falters?" The tension reached a climax during the next solstice festival. As the city gathered beneath the ancient oak in the grove, the emperor stood beside Livia, his hand resting on the scroll that had once illuminated the hidden chamber. He addressed the assembly, his voice carrying both authority and compassion. We have seen the power of our united voice. Let us not be afraid of the unknown, but brave enough to shape it. When the first notes of Livia's harp rose, a hush fell over the crowd. Then from the edge of the gathering, a lone trumpet sounded, a stark, metallic call that seemed at odds with the gentle strings. The source was Gaius Severus himself, his bronze instrument gleaming in the firelight. He played a solitary, mournful fanfare, a reminder of the empire's martial past. The sound clashed with the harp, creating a tension that rippled through the audience. Aelia stepped forward, her eyes alight with insight. She lifted her scroll and began to read verses that wove the trumpet's lament with the harp's hope, a poetic bridge that acknowledged the empire's strength in both steel and song. As she spoke, the musicians adjusted, allowing the trumpet's bold notes to rise and fall within the melody, not as discord but as a counterpoint that enriched the whole. The crowd felt the balance, the fierce resolve of the legions and the soothing balm of harmony intertwined, each giving depth to the other. When the final chord faded, the applause rose not as a single roar but as a layered chorus, some clapping with the vigor of soldiers, others swaying with the grace of dancers. Gaius Severus lowered his trumpet, his stern expression softened. He approached the emperor, laying his hand upon the scroll. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "the empire's future is a symphony, not a march." The night stretched on, lanterns flickering like fireflies, and the people of Rome sang, argued, and celebrated together. In the days that followed, the empire's policies reflected this new duality. Legions were trained not only in combat but in the cadence of marching songs. Courts allowed litigants to present their cases through spoken poetry. Markets echoed with the clink of coins and the strum of lyres. The covenant, once a fragile parchment, had become a living rhythm that guided Rome forward. And so, as the seasons turned, the city's heart beat in time with a chorus that spanned the empire. From the marble streets of the capital to the sun-baked plains of Hispania, each voice a thread, each song a promise, each moment a testament that when the many sang as one, the empire would indeed stand unshaken. A sudden tremor rippled through the empire's borders that no melody could have foreseen. In the eastern provinces, a drought had turned fertile valleys into cracked earth, and the once steady rhythm of harvest festivals faltered. Word reached Aurelia as she stood on the balcony of a marble villa overlooking the Tiber, the distant cries of parched fields carried on the wind. The emperor summoned his council, and the great hall of the Palatine filled once more with the hum of deliberation. But this time the discussion was not about verses or instruments. It was about survival. Aelia, now seasoned as the chief architect of the covenant, proposed a solution that blended the newfound harmony with pragmatic action. "We have taught our legions to march to song," she said, her voice steady, "but we have also taught our people to listen. Let us send choirs to the drought-stricken lands, not merely to comfort, but to coordinate the distribution of water, to organize communal labor, and to remind the people that they are not alone." The emperor nodded, and a cadre of musicians engineers was assembled. Among them was a young percussionist named Marcus, whose deft hands could coax rhythm from any surface. He fashioned a series of resonant drums from hollowed-out river stones, each tuned to a specific pitch that corresponded to a water allocation schedule. When the drums beat in unison across the plains, the farmers understood at a glance which aqueducts would be opened, which cisterns refilled, and where communal work parties should gather. Aurelia, hearing of this inventive plan, rode eastward on a swift horse, her voice already rehearsing the verses she would sing to rally the weary. She arrived at the town of Petra, where the sun baked the stone streets and the people moved with a sluggish, resigned gait. As she stepped into the central courtyard, a chorus of silence greeted her, eyes downcast, shoulders heavy with loss. She lifted her hands, and the first note of her song rose, a clear, lilting tone that seemed to draw the very heat from the air. Around her, the drums began their measured cadence, their deep thuds echoing like the heartbeat of the earth itself. The townsfolk paused, their attention captured by the intertwining of rhythm and melody. Aurelia's lyrics spoke of ancient rivers that once sang through the valleys, of the promise that even the driest soil could be coaxed back to life when people moved together as one. The effect was immediate. Men and women, inspired by the music, gathered their tools, repaired cracked irrigation channels, and shared the limited water they had in communal basins. Children, who had been silent from thirst, began to clap in time with the drums, their laughter a fragile but growing counterpoint to the somber notes of the drought. Back in Rome, the news of the successful intervention spread like a fresh refrain. Gaius Severus, now a regular participant in the empire's musical councils, stood before the Senate and raised his bronze trumpet, not in protest, but in celebration. He sounded a bright, hopeful fanfare that mingled with the soft strings of Livia's harp, a reminder that even the most steadfast traditions could adapt when guided by a shared purpose. The empire's next solstice festival, held under the same ancient oak that had witnessed the first tentative union of harp and trumpet, was transformed. This time, the performance began with a low, resonant drum beat that symbolized the drought's hardship, then rose into a soaring chorus of voices and instruments representing the collective effort that had turned scarcity into solidarity. The crowd, now a tapestry of soldiers, poets, merchants, and farmers, moved as a single organism, each step and clap echoing the rhythm of renewal. In the months that followed, the Covenant's influence deepened. Courts introduced song trials, where litigants could present their arguments through lyrical debate, allowing judges to hear the emotional truth behind the words. Legions incorporated music into their training, using rhythmic chants to improve coordination and morale, while also learning to play simple instruments that could soothe troops after battle. Markets thrived as merchants sang the provenance of their goods, and travelers exchanged regional ballads that carried news faster than any courier. Aurelia, now regarded as a living bridge between Rome and its farthest provinces, continued her journeys, her voice a constant reminder that the empire's strength lay not merely in stone and steel, but in the threads of melody that bound its people together. She returned to the capital one autumn evening, the sky painted in amber, and found the palace courtyard filled with a spontaneous gathering of citizens, senators, soldiers, children, and elders, all sharing songs that had traveled across deserts, forests, and seas. As the last notes faded into the night, a soft breeze rustled the leaves of the ancient oak, and a single firefly hovered above the scroll that had once illuminated the hidden chamber. The scroll, now displayed in the Hall of Harmony, bore a new inscription, added by Alia's hand. When the world is torn by discord, let the music of many hearts become the compass that guides us home. The empire, ever evolving, listened. Reasoning and approach. The story had just concluded with the inscription on the scroll of harmony, emphasizing that music should guide the empire when discord arises. To move the narrative forward, I introduced a new generation of characters who could carry the Covenant's spirit into fresh territories, showing the lasting impact of Aurelia's work. I chose Ilara, a talented young musician mentored by Aurelia, to act as a bridge to the nomadic tribes of the steppes, a region that had not yet been fully integrated into the musical tapestry of the empire. By having Ilara travel, encounter the shaman Aquila, and blend the empire's classical sounds with the primal music of the steppe, the story expands the Covenant's reach while preserving the theme of unity through melody. The continuation also hints at future developments, new instruments, cultural exchange, and the passing of leadership, maintaining momentum without concluding the tale. Continuation of the story. The amber light of the courtyard faded as night deepened, but the firefly's glow lingered, a tiny beacon over the scroll. In the days that followed, the Senate convened a special council to discuss the next phase of the Covenant. Scholars, musicians, and generals gathered around a marble table, their voices rising in a low chant that resonated with the rhythm of the city's heartbeats. It was decided that the Covenant would not remain a Roman treasure alone. It would become a living conduit, traveling along the empire's veins to every distant outpost. Aurelia, feeling the weight of years and the gentle tug of destiny, stepped aside. She placed a single, weather-worn lyre on the council's altar and whispered, "Teach them to listen, and they will hear the world's pulse." The lyre, once her companion on countless journeys, was now a symbol of transition. The council appointed Ilara as the new keeper of the covenant, entrusting her with the lyre, a set of finely tuned bronze trumpets, and a sealed scroll containing the original verses of the covenant's founding hymn. Ilara's first task was to journey beyond the marble walls of Rome, to the bustling market of Alexandria, where the scent of spices mingled with the salty breeze of the Mediterranean. There she met merchants who sang the routes of their caravans, their voices weaving maps of sand and stone. She taught them to embed the covenant's melody into their songs, so that each caravan's departure and return would be marked by a chorus that echoed across the desert. In return, the merchants shared with her the ancient chants of the Nile's priests, a low, resonant hum that seemed to summon the river itself. From Alexandria, Alara rode northward to the rugged cliffs of the Illyrian coast. The coastal towns, long accustomed to the roar of waves and the clang of shipyards, welcomed her with wary curiosity. She introduced the concept of song trials to the local magistrates, showing how disputes could be settled not by swords, but by verses that revealed truth through harmony. The fishermen, whose lives were dictated by the fickle sea, began to chant a new lullaby before each voyage, a melody that blended the cadence of oars with the sigh of the wind. Their boats returned more often, guided by the steady rhythm that steadied their nerves. The most transformative encounter awaited her on the vast steppes, where the horizon stretched like an endless sheet of gold. The nomadic tribes, led by the enigmatic shaman Aquila, lived by the pulse of the earth, their songs rising with the sunrise and falling with the dusk. Aquila welcomed Alara with a circle of fire, the flames dancing to a drumbeat that seemed to mimic the gallop of wild horses. Together they crafted a new composition, the deep, resonant drone of the empire's bronze trumpets intertwined with the airy, breath-filled notes of the steppes' reed pipes. This fusion created a sound that was both grounding and soaring, a reminder that strength could be found in both stone and wind. When Alara returned to Rome, the city was alive with anticipation. The Senate Hall was transformed into a grand amphitheater, its arches draped with vines that sang softly as the wind passed through them. On the appointed day, Alara stood before the gathered crowd, the lyre cradled in her arms, the bronze trumpets gleaming at her side. As she struck the first chord, a hush fell over the assembly. The music that rose was a tapestry of all she had gathered. The market chants of Alexandria, the sea shanties of Illyria, the steppe drones of the nomads, and the ancient Roman hymns that had begun it all. The audience felt the vibrations in their bones, a reminder that the empire's true foundation was not marble or conquest, but the shared heartbeat of countless voices. Children clapped, soldiers swayed, senators nodded, and even the stone statues seemed to lean in, listening. As the final note lingered, a soft breeze carried the melody beyond the walls, over the rooftops, across the fields, and into the distant hills where the ancient oak still stood. The firefly from the Hall of Harmony reappeared, its light pulsing in time with the lingering resonance, a tiny compass pointing toward a future where every heart's song would guide the empire home. The firefly hovered, its amber pulse quickening as if urging her forward, and Alara felt the night itself lean in, listening. Beyond the bridge, the city gave way to a quiet quarter where marble courtyards opened onto a grove of ancient olive trees, their silver leaves whispering in the breeze. In the center of the grove stood a stone basin, its surface still, reflecting the constellations above. As she stepped closer, the water rippled without wind, and from its depths rose a choir of voices, soft, layered, each tone a fragment of the songs she had gathered across the empire. The woman of moonlit skin emerged from the shadows of the basin, her robes shimmering with threads of starlight. "I am Lyris, keeper of the resonance," she said, her voice a melody that seemed to vibrate in Alara's very marrow. The firefly has brought you here, because the harmony you have sparked in Rome is only the first movement. The empire's heart beats in countless homes, markets, and fields, and each pulse must learn its own song. Lyris extended a hand, and the water of the basin rose in a translucent column, swirling with images of bustling streets, distant farms, and quiet hearths. In each scene, a thread of music wove through the people, children humming while they fetched water, merchants chanting as they weighed grain, soldiers marching to a rhythm that steadied their stride. These are the lives that will carry the melody forward, Lyris explained. But they need guidance, a living library of the songs you have forged, and guardians who can teach the language of harmony. Ilara felt the weight of the task settle like a warm cloak. How do we reach them? She asked, her eyes tracing the flickering firefly that now circled the basin's rim. The firefly is but one of many lights, Lyris replied. There are hidden sanctuaries, places where the old world's music still lingers, waiting to be awakened. We will travel together, gathering the lost verses and planting new ones. In each province we will establish a harmonic hearth, a place where people gather to sing, to resolve disputes, to celebrate the cycles of the earth. The hearths will be linked by a network of resonant stones, each stone a conduit that carries a fragment of the central melody across miles and mountains. With a graceful motion, Lyris placed a small, smooth stone into Ilara's palm. It thrummed faintly, echoing the bronze trumpets and reed pipes she had woven together. This is a seed of resonance. Plant it where you feel the need most, and it will grow into a hearth, drawing the surrounding souls into its song. Ilara slipped the stone into her satchel, feeling its steady heartbeat against her thigh. The firefly darted forward, its light now a bright ribbon that traced a path through the city's winding alleys. She followed, passing the sleeping Senate, the quiet taverns where patrons sang low ballads, and the workshops where artisans hammered metal to rhythmic beats. Each doorway she passed seemed to open a little wider, as if the very walls sensed the promise of a new cadence. At dawn, the firefly led her to the outskirts of Rome, where a modest courtyard lay abandoned, its stone floor cracked and overgrown with ivy. Ilara knelt, placed the seed of resonance upon the ground, and whispered the opening chord of the empire's tapestry. The stone glowed, and vines recoiled, revealing a smooth, polished surface that began to hum. A gentle wind rose, carrying the faint strains of the market chants, the sea shanties, and the steppe drones, weaving them into a single living hymn. Villagers from nearby farms, drawn by the sound, gathered around the emerging hearth. An elderly farmer raised his voice, singing a lullaby his mother had taught him, while a young girl added a bright trill that mimicked the chirping of crickets. As their voices intertwined, the stone amplified their harmony, sending ripples of resonance through the fields, coaxing wheat to sway in time and cattle to settle calmly. Word of the new hearth spread like a song carried on the wind. Within weeks, emissaries arrived, scholars from Alexandria bearing scrolls of Nile chants, Illyrian shipwrights with sea shanties etched into their oars, nomadic riders who rode in step with the drumbeats of the steppe. Each brought their own variations, each eager to learn from the growing network of resonant stones. Ilara traveled with Lyris to the farthest reaches of the empire, from the sun-kissed vineyards of Gaul to the mist-shrouded hills of Britannia. In each locale they planted a seed, taught the locals to listen to the earth's own rhythm, and watched as the hearths blossomed into communal circles of song. Disputes that once ended in blood now dissolved in verses, and festivals that had faded into mere feasting were reborn as symphonies of shared memory. One evening, as they rested beneath an ancient oak on the border of a newly established hearth, the firefly returned, its light brighter than ever. It hovered before Ilara, then rose, spiraling upward until it merged with a constellation that pulsed in perfect time with the hearth's melody. In that moment, Ilara understood that the firefly was not merely a guide, but a living embodiment of the Empire's collective song, a beacon that would forever point the way toward unity. She turned to Lyris, whose eyes now reflected the starlit sky. The Empire's foundation is indeed its heartbeat, Ilara said, but its future lies in the countless small beats that echo from every hearth, every field, every heart. Lyris smiled, and the night air filled with a soft chorus, the sound of countless voices rising together, a promise that as long as the firefly's light flickered, the harmony would endure, guiding the empire home wherever its people roamed. The seasons turned, and a thin veil of mist began to settle over the northern frontiers, where the mountains rose like stone-clad sentinels. In the valley of the Silver River, a village named Vespere struggled under a harsh winter that stole the warmth from its hearths. The resonant stones there, though newly planted, had yet to find their full voice, and the villagers whispered of a silence that threatened to swallow their songs. Ilara arrived on a moonless night, her cloak dusted with frost, and found the people huddled around a dim ember that sputtered more than it glowed. Lyris stood beside her, his breath forming clouds that rose and fell in rhythm with the wind. The firefly, now a faint constellation above, pulsed softly, as if urging them forward. "Listen," Ilara said, kneeling beside the stone. She placed her palm on its cool surface and closed her eyes, letting the faint hum of distant hearths travel through her. The stone responded with a low, trembling chord, a note that seemed to echo the sigh of the mountains themselves. She turned to the villagers and began to sing a low, steady chant, borrowing the cadence of the river's flow and the rustle of pine needles. One by one, the villagers lifted their voices. An old shepherd raised a mournful hymn that had carried his flock across the high passes for decades. A teenage girl, her cheeks flushed from the cold, added a bright trill that mimicked the crackle of ice breaking on the river bank. A group of children, their fingers numb, tapped rhythmically on the stone's edge, creating a percussive heartbeat that steadied the melody. As the collective song swelled, the stone's surface brightened, shedding a warm amber glow that chased the shadows from the surrounding huts. The wind shifted, carrying the music up the valley and into the crags. From the highest peak, a lone eagle descended, its wings beating in time with the newfound rhythm. It landed on the stone's edge, its talons gentle, and let out a call that blended seamlessly with the chorus. The resonance traveled farther than any messenger could have carried. Across the snow-capped ridges, a caravan of traders from the eastern deserts heard the hymn carried on the wind. They halted their camels, unrolled their woven blankets, and added the deep, resonant drums of their homeland to the growing tapestry. The stone, now a conduit for countless cultures, pulsed brighter, its hum deepening into a rich, layered chord that seemed to bind the very earth together. When the final note faded, a profound stillness settled over Vespera. The hearthstone glowed steadily, its heat sufficient to melt the ice that clung to the river's banks. The villagers gathered around, eyes shining with renewed hope. Ilara rose, feeling the firefly's distant twinkle in the sky, and spoke softly. The song of the empire is not a single voice, but a chorus that grows louder when each of us adds our own melody. Let this hearth be a beacon for those who wander in cold, that they may find warmth in the harmony we share. Lyris placed a hand on the stone, and a faint ripple spread outward, a silent promise that the resonance would travel beyond the valley, seeking out other places where silence threatened to take root. As they prepared to depart, the firefly's constellation shimmered, its light now interwoven with the stars themselves, a map of glowing points that marked every hearth, every song, every heart that beat in unison across the empire. The next dawn found the trio on a narrow ridge overlooking the sea, the wind carrying the salty scent of distant storms. Below them, the port city's lanterns flickered like fireflies caught in a net, their glow a reminder of the night's communion. Ilara pressed the small shard of the hearthstone, taken from the larger stone in Vespera, against her palm, feeling its steady pulse echo through her veins. Lyris adjusted the satchel of woven drums, their skins still humming with the desert rhythm, while Kaelin whispered a soft refrain, her voice now tempered by the hope she had witnessed. Their path led them inland to the ancient monastery of Thaler, perched on a cliff where clouds gathered like a congregation of silent monks. The monks, cloistered for generations, had long abandoned song, believing that silence was the purest prayer. When Alara and her companions entered the stone courtyard, the monks regarded them with wary eyes, their robes rustling like dry leaves. Without a word, Ilara placed the hearthstone shard upon the altar's cold marble, and Kaelin began to sing the lullaby she had learned from the port city's children, a melody that rose and fell like the tide. At first the monks remained still, their faces a mask of contemplation. Then one elder lifted his hands, and a low chant rose from his throat, resonant and deep, as if the very walls were breathing. The other monks joined, their voices forming a layered chorus that blended the ancient prayer of silence with the new song of unity. As the harmony swelled, the marble altar glowed faintly, and a thin line of light traced the edge of the stone, spreading across the courtyard like a sunrise over the cliffs. The light reached the monastery's library, where scrolls of forgotten lore lay in dust. One scroll, bound in silver thread, unfurled on its own, revealing a map of the empire marked with tiny ember symbols, places where the hearthstone's resonance had already taken root. The monks recognized the pattern. Each ember corresponded to a community that had once been isolated, now linked by song. The elder monk, his eyes shining, whispered, "The silence we kept was a shield, but it also kept us from hearing the world's heartbeat." Inspired, the monks offered their own gifts, a set of crystal chimes that sang with the wind, and a bell forged from the mountain's iron, its tone pure and resonant. Lyris took the chimes, feeling their vibration align with the drums he carried. Together they fashioned a portable ensemble, each instrument tuned to the hearthstone's frequency, ensuring that wherever they traveled, the music could be amplified without losing its core. From Thaler, they descended into the Valley of Echoes, a place where the wind itself seemed to carry whispers of the past. Here, the ground was scarred by old battles, and the remnants of broken banners lay half buried in the soil. The people of Echoes had learned to survive in quiet, their lives a muted rhythm of toil. When the keepers arrived, the villagers gathered around the fire, eyes wary but curious. Ilara placed the hearthstone shard upon a flat stone near the hearth, and Kalin sang a new verse, a blend of the shepherd's hymn, the port city's lullaby, and the monk's chant. The villagers responded slowly at first, a hesitant hum that grew steadier with each passing measure. A blacksmith, his hands calloused from years of shaping steel, added a metallic clang that rang like a bell forged in fire. Children, their faces lit by the ember glow, clapped their hands, creating a percussive rhythm that echoed the heartbeat of the valley. As the song rose, the scarred earth seemed to soften, and a faint green sprout pushed through a crack, reaching toward the light. When the final chord faded, the hearthstone's glow intensified, casting a warm amber across the valley. The villagers, moved by the shared music, lifted their heads and saw the sky alight with the firefly constellation, each point now a beacon of connection. Ilara spoke softly. "From the highest peaks to the deepest valleys, our songs bind us. Let this hearth be a promise that no silence can endure when hearts choose to sing together." The ripple from the hearthstone traveled onward, touching distant borders where winter still held its grip. In each new place, the keepers of the hearth left behind a fragment of song, a chord that would grow as more voices joined. Their journey continued, not as a quest for a final destination, but as an ever-expanding chorus that wove the empire into a single, living melody. As the keepers of the hearth journeyed onward, the melody they had kindled in the Valley of Echoes began to resonate in distant lands. In the frost-bitten mountains of Krail, where the air was crisp and the people were hardy, a group of travelers stumbled upon a hidden glade. The trees, once bare and skeletal, now wore a mantle of green, their branches swaying to an unheard rhythm. In the center of the glade stood an ancient tree, its trunk gnarled and twisted, yet vibrant with life. The travelers, weary from their journey, felt an inexplicable sense of peace settle over them as they approached the tree. Carved into its trunk was a symbol, a stylized representation of a lyre, surrounded by intricate patterns that seemed to shimmer in the fading light. The travelers, drawn by the symbol, reached out to touch the tree, and as they did, the air around them began to vibrate with a gentle hum. The hum grew in intensity, and soon the sound of a lone flute drifted on the breeze, its melody intertwining with the hum. The travelers closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them, and when they opened them again, they saw the keepers of the hearth standing before them. Lyris, Alara, and Kalen smiled, their faces aglow with the knowledge that their song had reached this distant place. The leader of the travelers, a grizzled old warrior, approached the keepers, his eyes shining with a deep sense of longing. He told them of his people, who had lived in Krail for generations, their music a haunting blend of wind and stone. He spoke of the silence that had fallen over the land, a silence born of sorrow and loss. The keepers listened, their hearts filled with compassion, and when the warrior finished speaking, Alara took a crystal chime from her pack and struck it with a mallet. The sound that emerged was like nothing the travelers had ever heard before, a pure, crystalline tone that seemed to capture the essence of the mountain itself. As the chime's resonance faded, Kalen began to sing, his voice weaving a melody that spoke directly to the hearts of the travelers. The warrior, his eyes closed, felt the music stir something deep within him, and he began to sing as well, his voice blending with Kalen's in perfect harmony. The others joined in, their voices rising and falling in a joyful, sorrowful cadence that seemed to match the beat of their own hearts. The music swelled, filling the glade, and as it did, the trees seemed to lean in as if to listen. The ancient tree, its branches swaying in time, appeared to be conducting the symphony, its symbol pulsing with a soft, ethereal light. In that moment, the travelers knew that they were not alone, that their music was part of a greater melody that stretched across the empire, a melody that would continue to grow and evolve, a living, breathing thing that would bind them all together. As the final notes faded away, the keepers of the hearth smiled, knowing that their journey had borne fruit in this distant land. They departed, leaving behind a shard of the hearthstone and the promise of a song that would continue to echo through the mountains of Krail, a song that would forever be a part of the Empire's ever-expanding chorus. The night deepened, and the melody that rose from the valley did not wane. Instead, it gathered strength, threading itself through the stone walls of the homes, slipping into the cracks of the ancient wells, and curling around the sleeping children like a soft blanket. The shard of hearthstone, now cradled in the warrior's palm, glowed brighter with each verse, its light spilling onto the faces of those gathered, illuminating eyes that had not seen hope in generations. From the hilltop beyond the village, a lone figure watched. It was Lyris, her silver hair catching the moon's pale glow, her lute slung across her back. She had felt the echo of the song across the distance, a tremor that resonated with the same frequency as the lyre carved into the ancient tree. With a quiet sigh, she raised her instrument and began to play, her notes weaving into the existing chorus, adding layers of harmony that lifted the music beyond mortal ears. As the combined song swelled, the ground beneath the village seemed to pulse. Small fissures opened in the earth, not as cracks of destruction, but as veins of luminous crystal, each one humming in time with the melody. From these veins rose thin threads of light that rose like fireflies, spiraling upward until they formed a luminous arch over the settlement. The arch shimmered with colors that shifted with the cadence of the song: emerald for sorrow, sapphire for remembrance, amber for joy, creating a living tapestry that reflected the hearts of all who sang. The villagers, awed by the spectacle, fell to their knees, their voices trembling with reverence. The old warrior, his beard dusted with the night's chill, lifted the hearthstone shard higher. In that instant, a vision unfolded before his eyes, a great river of sound flowing from the glade where the keepers had stood, winding through valleys, over cliffs, and into the farthest reaches of the empire. At its source, the ancient tree pulsed like a heart, its lyre symbol beating in rhythm with the world's breath. From the vision, a new understanding blossomed. The song was not merely a balm for grief. It was a conduit, a bridge that could carry stories, memories, and even the very essence of a people across distance and time. The warrior realized that the shard was a key, not just a relic, capable of unlocking this conduit for anyone willing to listen and to give voice. With renewed purpose, he turned to the villagers. "We must become the keepers of this song," he said, his voice steady despite the awe that threatened to overwhelm him. "Let each generation learn its notes, let each heart add its own refrain. Only then will the silence that once fell over Crail be forever broken." The next dawn, the village awoke to a chorus that seemed to have been waiting for the sunrise. Children practiced simple chants, their laughter blending with the deeper tones of the elders. The blacksmith, whose hammer had once rung only in the rhythm of metal, now struck his anvil in time with the beat, forging not just tools but instruments of resonance. Even the wind that swept through the mountain passes seemed to carry fragments of the melody, whispering it into neighboring hamlets. Word of the song's revival traveled faster than any messenger. Traders who passed through the valley reported hearing a strange, uplifting hum that made their burdens feel lighter. Nomadic bards stopped at the village's edge, laying down their own verses and learning the new refrain. In distant citadels, scholars recorded the phenomenon, noting how the crystal veins beneath the village acted as natural amplifiers, turning a single note into a chorus that could be felt across miles. Months turned into seasons, and the song grew. The keepers of the hearth, sensing the ripple of their gift, returned to the glade where they had first met the travelers. They found the ancient tree still standing, its lyre symbol now glowing with a steady, golden light, as if fed by the countless voices that now honored it. Lyris, Alara, and Kaelin gathered beneath its branches, their instruments ready, and together they sang a hymn of gratitude, their voices weaving a protective lattice around the melody that now bound the empire. As the hymn reached its climax, A gentle wind rose, carrying with it a single seed of crystal, small, translucent, and humming faintly. It drifted down the mountain, landing in the palm of a young girl who had been listening from the edge of the village. She looked at the seed, felt its vibration, and instinctively began to hum. The hum matched the song, and as she sang, the seed cracked open, releasing a cascade of tiny light fragments that scattered like snow, each one embedding itself in the soil of the valley. From those fragments sprouted new saplings, each bearing the lyre symbol on its bark. The forest began to expand, a living network of trees that could echo the song, amplifying it further with each passing year. The valley, once a place of silence, transformed into a sanctuary of sound, a place where every breath, every heartbeat, contributed to an ever-evolving chorus that resonated through the heart of the empire, promising that the music of Krail would never again be silenced.